Welcome, Dr. Shayne again. Hey, I wanted to review a little bit of information. We won't take a deep dive, but a brief dive, a shallow dive into what we call GLP-1 agonists, or what is it that GLP does, because it's become a very controversial yet popular topic in both the, from the perspective of weight loss, diabetes, wanting to tackle things using things like Ozempic, and others, Stride, and so on. And what I want to do is I want to talk a bit about the GLP-1 itself, and in the end, maybe look at some alternative, how we can manage GLP-1 naturally, because it is a natural pathway. It's a pathway that exists in our intestines, and it mediates things like insulin release, as well as satiety, and it affects a lot of the other hormones that we use, for example, releasing glucagon and PYY, etc. So it's an important part of our metabolism, and yet we need to be careful regarding it, because we don't want to overpush or underpush it. So backing up a bit, GLP-1 is a peptide that's released from L cells, or endocrine cells, in our intestine. The vast majority are found in the ileum, but they can be found elsewhere. Its immediate effects, and the effects that most people seem to be concerned, or the interest surrounds these, and that is the effect on diabetes type 2, as well as metabolism or weight loss. And clearly, there is an effect. GLP is an important aspect of what we metabolize, when we metabolize. There's a circadian rhythm to it, in fact, and it's managed both in the gut, alimentary canal, but it also has peripheral or more distal effects throughout the body. But that being said, there is a really key component that no one's talking about, and that's the fact that our microbiota help us regulate GLP-1. And it does it through a number of mechanisms. First and foremost, if you have the right organisms in your gut, and when you eat a healthy meal, it metabolizes in your food and creates these messengers. We call them short-chain fatty acids. Sometimes you hear butyrate, propionate, acetate. These are compounds that then trigger the L cells in your gut to release GLP-1. And that both creates the insulin release pathway as well as satiety. So it's a really important factor that, or let's say it's a fact that our microbiome is a key component of the GLP-1 pathway. Regardless of all these exogenous things that people are taking, we need to be considerate of the microbiome. And here's why. One, I just told you that it helps regulate GLP-1. That's an important feature. Secondly, the health of the microbiome dictates whether that regulation is positive or a negative, meaning that you get a positive feedback loop when the microbiota is healthy, and it's helping you regulate that release. It's helping keeping it on a rhythm. Now, if you have dysbiosis, or you lack the organisms that help you regulate your food intake as it's converted into GLP-1 releasers or upregulators, that's a healthy process. That's a normal metabolic process. So in terms of the health of the microbiome, as well as the health of our own intestinal L cells, for example. Now, if we add in GLP-1 agonists, which are otherwise called Ozempic, Ligustulide, well, it's more of a metformin, but these drugs are what we consider a mimic. What they do is they target the same GLP-1 receptors that then also trigger things like satiety and insulin release, and that is their goal. That is why they were developed. And yet, the dark side of this, or the potential risk, and this needs to be dealt with through your practitioner. I can't tell you whether or not you do it or you don't do it. This is very practitioner based. However, what you need to know is there are consequences when you are releasing or stimulating the perpetual GLP-1 release through an agonist, and we're already seeing some of those. So it can be very uncomfortable. You can have digestive issues. You can have inflammatory bowel issues. You can have drops in energy, because these messages are sent through either the endocrine system or through the vagal nerve, and it's a gut-brain axis very clearly. So we want to keep tabs on that when we take different routes. That being said, the final part before I leave you is what are some of the opportunities we have in a different way, in a more natural way, and still every bit as powerful in many ways. And that is microbiota and the food we feed them. So there's multiple studies on animal models as well as in humans. There are a number of fibers, for example, beta-glucans, some of the fructans, some of the oligoxylans. These all can be metabolized by our microorganisms when they're in a diverse state, and they produce all of the metabolites that stimulate GLP-1 release by the L cells. Secondly, we have a number of probiotics. Now, many of them next-gen probiotics that you'll hear more and more about from me, but there are some current gen like lactobacilli, Saccharomyces. These are organisms that when consumed as a probiotic, they have shown a statistically significant increase in GLP-1 rises in plasma levels. Now, that's partly through their presence as well as their metabolites. But even more importantly, in the future, we're looking at organisms that should already be in us, and we're having to bring them back or change the numbers, change the ecology by adding back organisms like Prausnitzi, Faecobacterium, as well as Akkermansia, Collinsella, and these are also very, very efficient at producing metabolites that raise GLP-1 levels naturally without really affecting this metabolic cycle into too extreme of places. These are the take-homes I wanted you to get today. We'll do a deeper dive on this on a webinar. Hope to see you guys soon, and please tune in. Thanks.